Good morning, Europe. Welcome to the program. Our top stories for you this hour. Remembering the victims. 1 week on, Greeks gather to commemorate the more than 90 victims of the deadly wildfires. Anger mounts as Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras visited the disaster zone. He faces mounting anger over the government's response. And over in the Cube, our social media news desk.
No preconditions. We have the reaction as Donald Trump hints at a possible meeting with Iran.
Him or anarchy? The Nicaraguan president Daniel Ortega tells Euronews that it's either him or anarchy as the ongoing violent crackdown on protesters leave many dead. Counting underway. Votes are being counted in the historic Zimbabwe election, the first since Robert Mugabe was ousted, with two lead candidates vying for the top job. And outrage in France over a shocking viral video of a man violently slapping a woman on the street in Paris. Thank you for starting your morning with us. Our top story this hour, the Greek Fire Service says it has been able to identify 70 of those who died in last week's devastating wildfires. At least 92 people perished in the blazes, but it's feared that this figure could rise. 14 people are still missing, and last night, a week after the fires broke out, hundreds of people attended a vigil in front of the Greek parliament. The government has announced an action plan, but people are still asking how a disaster of this scale was possible, and they are demanding change.
No, I don't think that something's going to change after this. I think it will continue everything like in the past years. We have suffered, Greeks will have suffered so many things all these years, and I think that we have stopped fighting, I think, or something like this.
Personally, I don't blame anybody. I cannot do that right now. The sorrow is too, we cannot blame anybody. We don't do politics. Right now, you cannot think about politics. It's just something that happened.
Well, yesterday, Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras made an unannounced visit to Mati, one of the worst-hit areas, and there he spoke to engineers and rescue workers, but he didn't make a public statement. Instead, he tweeted in Greek about his indescribable grief and, quote, immense respect for those who tackled the blazes and for the people now involved in the post-fire recovery and restoration work. But he has been criticized for his government's response to the disaster, and the visit to Mati prompted further anger from opposition politicians. Now, Faye Dulcari from our Athens bureau has been keeping a close eye on Alexis Tsipras and his government, and she's joining me now from Mati. Faye, can you tell us what the government's response was?
Yes, as you said, there's heavy criticism against the government for the way they handled this mega fire. Yesterday, 1 week after the lethal fire, Prime Minister Tsipras visited the fire-stricken areas. And as you said in a tweet about his visit, he expressed his unspeakable sorrow. The tragedy has triggered a political row between the two main political parties, Syriza and New Democracy. Opposition leader and president of New Democracy, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, is holding a press conference today, later in the day, and we expect him to express his criticism again against Tsipras. Yesterday, his party slammed Prime Minister's visit to the burnt area, saying he visited Mati like a thief in a fully protected environment. The main opposition had been asking for early elections many months now, and of course after the fire. And this is what Mitsotakis is expected to do today during the press conference. So, as for the response of the government, Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras has instructed government ministers to restore the fire-hit areas and help all those that were hurt by adopting quick procedures that will be simple and without bureaucracy, according to the government spokesperson. And as we said yesterday, those hurt by the fires can apply for financial assistance from the state, which amounts to 5,000 euros for families, 6,000 euros for the families with more than 3 children, and 8,000 euros for businesses.
And Faye, can you confirm that there's already been a lawsuit filed against the government and that key figures will be testifying? What more can you tell us about that?
Yes, there's the first lawsuit filed on Monday by a citizen, by a resident of the area that is blaming the government and the local authorities for the way they handle the whole situation. And the last few days, we have been seeing a blame game between the local authorities and the central government for the tragedy that has mostly to do with the evacuation of the area that never happened. Fire department, supported by the government, of course, says that they urged the two mayors of the area to evacuate, but the mayors don't accept that. The first mayor of Rafina testified before the public prosecutor yesterday. In an interview that I had with him last week, he left clear hints, but he said that I will say everything before justice, before the public prosecutor, and when the time comes. The second mayor that is testifying today has threatened with revelations many times the last days, but we will see what he's going to say today.
All right, thank you for that. Faye Dulcari from our Athens bureau on the ground there in Mati. Thank you. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump said that he's willing to meet with Iran's leaders with no preconditions. And this is after he pulled out of that Iran nuclear deal, which he called, if you remember, a waste of paper. Well, Alex has been following this story. Alex.
Good morning, Tessa. Well, there's a history to this, isn't there? Donald Trump has made no secret of his dislike for the Iran nuclear deal. But yesterday, in a conference with Italy's Conte next to him, Donald Trump seemed to soften his stance. Let's listen to what the president had to say.
So I believe in meeting. I would certainly meet with Iran if they wanted to meet. I don't know that they're ready yet. They're having a hard time right now. But I ended the Iran deal. It was a ridiculous deal. I do believe that they will probably end up wanting to meet, and I'm ready to meet anytime they want to. And I don't do that from strength or from weakness. I think it's an appropriate thing to do. If we could work something out that's meaningful, not the waste of paper that the other deal was, I would certainly be willing to meet.
Now, let's put that in context. This is 8 days after Donald Trump tweeted this at Rouhani, the president of Iran, saying, never ever threaten the United States again. Now, these strong words here, threatening consequences, the like of which few throughout history have ever seen before, comes after the Iranian president hinting America should be cautious about taking a stronger stance against Tehran. Donald Trump now obviously leaving open the possibility of reimposing sanctions. Now, let's just take you back in time a little more and take you through how this has all unfolded. In 2015, President Obama, perhaps what some saw as his star foreign policy achievement, agreed with Iran in principle that they would have sanctions stopped in exchange for the country freezing the nuclear program. Donald Trump very critical of the deal while on the campaign trail in 2016 and then obviously becoming elected. This year, May this year, Donald Trump pulls America out of the deal. America's out. Then we have on the 23rd of July this war of words as Donald Trump responds to comments from the Iranian president about possible a stronger stance against Iran, warning them against never ever threatening Iran again. And then now, yesterday, we have this suggestion that President Trump actually he's open to a meeting. No actual agreement, but also no preconditions set down. Now, the White House sort of rode back on that afterwards. Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, as well, saying, well, if there was a meeting, there might be some preconditions. So seeming confusion there. So how is the world reacting? The world, as we reported last week, a lot of people talking about that capitalized tweet, people even saying it looks like Donald Trump's threatening Iran with military action. That's how strong people felt. Well, this time around, there's a bit of a mixed response. The president of the Iranian Council in America, writing an opinion piece for NBC, said that Donald Trump's flip-flopping stance between being really tough and then open to Iran won't work. He thinks that in order to make progress, Donald Trump is going to have to give some concessions, maybe ditching the rhetoric about this being a waste of paper, the Iran deal. Other people pointing out, as Joyce, a journalist here in Washington, points out, that actually Donald Trump's strategy of one-on-one meetings, hinting here that with news that North Korea today could be still pursuing a missile program, that actually Donald Trump's strategy of meetings isn't actually a strategy at all. It's not working. But Donald Trump is receiving support from perhaps an unlikely source, Code Pink. This is a pro-peace and diplomacy group in America who have been very critical of Donald Trump in the past, here saying that people should be getting behind Donald Trump's suggestion of a meeting and encouraging him to have this dialogue. So at the moment, no agreement. But what do you think? Is it time that Donald Trump comes back around the table? Let's not forget the EU is trying to save this deal. Or is a firmer stance needed? You can let us know your thoughts using #TheCube.
All right, thanks for that, Alex. And still to come for you on Good Morning Europe, Nicaragua is facing a political crisis that's left hundreds dead and thousands injured. The Nicaraguan president tells Euronews it's either him in power or anarchy. So we'll bring you more of that report. Plus, North Korea appears to be working on new ballistic missiles despite improving relations with the Donald Trump administration. Well, we'll bring you all the latest after the break. Your top story on Good Morning Europe. 1 week after the deadliest wildfires in recent history, Greeks gathered outside Parliament for a vigil to commemorate over 90 victims. Now, since Nicaragua's deadly political crisis erupted in April, human rights groups say up to 400 people have been killed and a further 600 are missing. The peaceful protests that have spiraled into a wider opposition of President Daniel Ortega's government have been continually attacked by pro-government paramilitaries. Meanwhile, President Ortega has refused to step down or call elections. Euronews' Oscar Valero spoke to him, and here is his report.
More and more Nicaraguans are fleeing to the neighboring and more stable Costa Rica because of the deep political and social crisis hitting their country, the worst since the 80s. The hundreds of deaths and thousands of injured since April 18th meant they had no choice. In an interview with Euronews, the Nicaraguan president, Daniel Ortega, claims anti-government protests are financed by the United States. You have mentioned several times that these protests are funded by the U.S., but I haven't seen any evidence yet. Do you have any evidence? Of course I do. Why haven't you shown them yet? There are the accounts that show the U.S. agencies send money to these people through various U.S. agencies. They have even said it publicly. They have announced the amount of millions they allocate to Nicaragua for democracy, as they say. But they divert it to destabilize the country. There are many examples of these paramilitaries collaborating with your security forces. No, here we have what is called the voluntary police. No, but these were masked people because the volunteer police is not masked. The volunteer policemen in special operations are masked in normal time. There are even countries in Latin America where judges are masked so that they don't get killed. So these people who define themselves as paramilitaries were still volunteer police officers. That's right, they are volunteer cops. Are you not considering resigning at any point during the dialogue or bringing forward elections? Because calling snap elections is also constitutional. In Central America, this has not happened. In Colombia, every time there is a peace process, elections are not brought forward with the blood that has been shed in Central America. So you aren't even thinking about it? No, the opposition has told me it would lead to a country in anarchy. So it's either you or anarchy. It's either you or chaos. Yes, to follow that path is to open the door to anarchy in the country. Ortega stays and the dialogue between government and opposition seems to be further than ever, especially since the church is not seen anymore as neutral by the authorities that consider it part of the demonstrators.
And joining me in the studio now is Oscar Valero. Oscar, thank you very much for joining us today. Now, what was that like, meeting the man at the center of this crisis? What was his attitude towards what was going on in his country?
Well, the message they try to pass through is that everything is fine now. So Ortega was very calm. Ortega was very comfortable with his contradictions, even when we pointed them out, he was very comfortable with it. So I think he was trying to transmit that everything is calm now in the country, even if it's not so much.
Yeah, and also in his interview, in this interview you did with him, he was also blaming the United States for interference, he said. Can you tell us about the response also to that accusation?
Well, the states called for elections in the country, and they threatened the country again with sanctions, which in the short term I think is useful for him, because he's using like this victimist rhetorics that he can use to maintain a little bit more, to stay in power a little bit more.
You know, and I noticed when you asked him, why don't you call for snap elections? And he said, well, it's either I stay in power or it's anarchy. So do you think moving forward he's going to be as defiant, in his behavior?
Well, I think he really believes that if he doesn't stay in power, everything is going to collapse. So this is actually the risk, because if he's not able to compromise, we are going to be in a situation like in Venezuela now, like something like in Maduro with waves of violence going up and down, and in a political dead end. So there is a very big risk of Nicaragua becoming a new Venezuela without the oil, which is important.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Oscar Valero there. And you can watch that interview, of course, on Euronews.com. Now, California firefighters on Monday gained ground on a massive wildfire that has killed 6 people and destroyed hundreds of homes, while rescuers continue to search for at least 7 missing people. The Carr fire began a week ago, about 240 kilometers north of Sacramento, and doubled in size over the weekend. It charred an area half the size of New York City and forced 38,000 people to flee their homes. 2 firefighters, a 70-year-old woman and her 2 young great-grandchildren, are known to be among the dead. Malian incumbent President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita's spokesman has claimed that the president is substantially in the lead, according to a provisional count. The United Nations is pressuring all sides to accept the eventual result to avert a political crisis. Members of the Russian punk protest group Pussy Riot, who disrupted the World Cup, have been detained just after being released from jail in Moscow. 3 female activists were immediately reapprehended as they left a Moscow detention center on Monday evening. And still to come for you on the program, North Korea appears to be working on new ballistic missiles despite improving relations with the Trump administration. We'll bring you all the latest. And over in the Cube,
we have the story as a video of a woman being assaulted in Paris goes viral, sparking a huge debate. But first, let's take a break.
You're watching Good Morning Europe. Welcome back to the program. Now, North Korea appears to be working on new ballistic missiles, according to media reports. The revelations come a month after Kim Jong-un signed an accord with U.S. President Trump to start the denuclearization process. Well, joining us in the studio is our correspondent Alistair Sanford. Alistair, what exactly is being reported here?
Well, Tessa, these reports come from, quote, unnamed U.S. officials, but they're quite detailed. They're carried in the Washington Post and also on Reuters. New evidence from U.S. intelligence appears to show, this including satellite photos, appears to show that there's ongoing activity at North Korean nuclear and missile sites, and suggesting that work on advanced weapons is continuing. In particularly, they highlight one factory near Pyongyang, the Sanumdong plant. Now, this is where it's believed that the first intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching the US have been developed. And the images from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency suggest that work on these weapons is continuing. There's been a certain amount of reaction, particularly on Twitter, from independent analysts suggesting that they find these reports credible. Remember, we've also had recent testimony from the US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, saying that the North Korean factories continue to produce fissile material. Elsewhere, it's thought that the North Koreans are certainly honouring the agreement with Trump by dismantling some equipment, but it's thought that that's largely symbolic. And while they're doing that, this evidence suggests they're perhaps still working on weapons elsewhere.
And of course, this is coming after, we saw North Korea returning the remains of Americans killed during the war, and Donald Trump being very positive about progress. And then this seems to be a blow.
Yes, it would certainly call into question his strategy. Yes, there has been some progress, but consider the triumphant return and the euphoria amongst Trump supporters after the summit in Singapore with Kim Jong-un. Donald Trump tweeted, "There's no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea." He said at the press conference with the North Korean leader that Kim Jong-un had reaffirmed his unwavering commitment to complete denuclearization. Yes, as you say, there has been progress. What's believed to be these remains of US soldiers have been flown home. There's also ongoing talks between the North and South military officials. But this does call into question what was achieved at that summit. In particular, what does this phrase complete denuclearization mean, and what are the actual concrete steps that are going to be put into place? The
crux of the matter, isn't it, Alistair? Thank you very much for that, Alistair. Well, now, German officials will meet later today to discuss financial aid for farmers as record temperatures and prolonged droughts threaten billions in damages to crops and livestock. Farmers are calling on the government to declare a state of emergency as northern and eastern regions struggle to cope with the dry spell. Well, joining me from one of the worst affected areas is our correspondent, Jessica Salt. Jessica, how bad really is the situation there at the moment?
Well, Tessa, I'm here in Trebin in Brandenburg, where local farmers are really worried about the effects that the ongoing heatwave and lack of rain is having on their crops. As you can see behind me, this field here, usually used for growing a variety of crops, is really beginning to dry out, and it doesn't look like there's an end in sight. In fact, today predicted to be the hottest day of the year so far, and it is mostly farmers here in the east of Germany and in the north who have been affected. I spent the day with local farmer Thomas Gebert, who showed me the devastating effects that this ongoing drought has had on his farm.
Fields of Brandenburg are turning into a desert. The rural region outside of Berlin hasn't seen rain for over 3 months, and the unusually high temperatures have left crops parched. It's a real worry for farmers such as Thomas Gebert.
Normally the entire field should be covered with small rape plants because of the seeds that fall out while harvesting. But this moment we have just some emerged wheat plants, but you don't see any or just less rape here on this field.
Local water sources like this stream have all but dried up.
This region has not seen any serious rainfall since mid-April, and this is proving catastrophic for local farmers and their crops. Farmer Thomas Gebert manages around 4,000 hectares of arable and grassland, and he believes around half of his crops could be lost if this drought continues.
There are 2,500 dairy cattle living on the farm collective. But with less maize and grass to be harvested, food supplies for the cows are running low.
Yeah, at the moment, no one of my neighbor farmers would buy any cow because everybody have the same problem. So I have neighbors which reduced actually the number of their cows, and because they cannot sell it because nobody would buy it, they have to slaughter the cows. And I hope not that this is an option which we have to go.
But with the scorching weather showing no signs of relenting, farmers in the region are set to have a difficult summer.
Association will be meeting members of the Agricultural Ministry in Berlin today, and these farmers are demanding €1 billion of compensation for lost crops due to extreme temperatures, and they're also calling on this crisis, which is what they're calling it, to be called a state of emergency. Now, the government line is they want to wait until the end of August, until the final harvest has been collected, until they can decide on it. But certainly it does look like it could be a real state of emergency. Thomas Gebert, this farmer, told me yesterday that of the 1,000 hectares of maize that he farms, only a quarter are viable at the moment, and this is a real problem for him as it is a critical food source for his cattle. In fact, dairy farmers, some of the worst affected, and indeed are saying that they might need to push the prices of milk up. So this is a real concern here in Germany at the moment, and farmers also saying to me that although this is a real anomaly, this very warm summer, they're also worried that they might need to start preparing for the fact that this could become the new normal.
Thank you for that. Jessica Salt reporting there. And coming up, we will have a lot more on our top stories. We'll be live in Zimbabwe, where counting is underway in that historic election, the first since Robert Mugabe was ousted from power. And Donald Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, goes on trial today. Now, this is the first trial to come out of that probe into Russian meddling in U.S. elections. Plus, this is a shocking video of a man who had violently slapped a woman on a Paris street. But first, we'll leave you with today's no comment from California. More on the wildfires we talked about earlier. Now, firefighters are gaining some ground, but it's still a battle to get the flames under control. Top stories in Good Morning Europe, remembering the victims. 1 week on, Greeks gather to commemorate the more than 90 victims of the deadly wildfires. Anger mounts as Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras visited the disaster zone. He faces mounting anger over the government's response. And over in the Cube, our social media news desk.
President Donald Trump hints he's open to a meeting with Iran. That's just months after pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal.
Him or anarchy? The Nicaraguan president Daniel Ortega tells Euronews it's either him in power or anarchy, as the ongoing violent crackdown on protesters leave many dead. Well, our top story this hour, the Greek fire service says it has been able to identify 70 of those who died in last week's devastating wildfires. At least 92 people perished in the blazes, but it's feared that this figure could rise. 14 people are still missing. And last night, a week after the fires broke out, hundreds of people attended a vigil in front of the Greek parliament. And we will be monitoring, of course, that story for you as well. Now, Zimbabwe has closed its polls and counting is underway in the country's first ever election without Robert Mugabe on the ballot paper. Opposition leader Nelson Chamisa tweeted this morning that after 10,000 polling station counts, his party have done exceedingly well. Well, turnout was high as the country chooses what could be its fourth leader since gaining independence. Euronews' Evelyn Laverick has the story.
They began the counting of votes by lamplight. The whole country is in a heightened state of anticipation for the results of Zimbabwe's first election since the ousting of former President Robert Mugabe. Both parliamentary and local elections are taking place, but it's the presidential poll which had voters queuing up at first light. The turnout was around 75%.
It could go either way, but whichever way, whichever party that brings change, why not?
It does not matter who wins or who loses, but it's finally democracy.
Change seems to be the watchword. It's a tight two-horse race for president between incumbent Emerson Mnangagwa and his main rival Nelson Chamisa. Both claim the election will bring a new dawn.
Today is peaceful. I have no doubt that the end process of the entire electoral process will remain peaceful.
A peaceful vote is in sharp contrast with Zimbabwe's election history of intimidation and violence under Mugabe. But there are concerns that if the outcome is close, opposition MDC leader Nelson Chamisa may not accept the result. Another step away from the past has been the presence of hundreds of international observers for the first time in 16 years to ensure the vote went smoothly. The EU's chief observer said it was too soon to make a judgment.
In some cases it works very smoothly, but in others we see that it's totally disorganized and that people become angry, that people leave. And we have not found out whether that is coincidence or bad organization.
The official result is due within 5 days, but there could be an indication of the winner soon. With both main contenders promising far-reaching reforms, there is a mood of optimism. Evelyn Laverick, Euronews.
Well, joining us live from the Zimbabwean capital, Harare, is correspondent from your news sister channel, African News, Pindai Dube. Pindai, thank you very much for joining us today. Can you tell us, because we know that Chamisa has tweeted and he suggests that his MDC party has done very well, but we were still waiting for official results. How do we interpret what he tweeted?
Yes, good morning. Thank you. It's very true. Chamisa has actually tweeted that about 10,000 polling stations have been counted. What is happening right now is that according to the Zimbabwe Electoral Act, results of each polling stations they are put behind, in front, outside of the polling stations. So what is happening is that the political parties are taking those results and putting them together before the announcements by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. So it's all over the social media, it's everywhere. The results are being posted from outside polling stations, and Chamisa is leading according to the results which are on polling stations.
Indeed, and we remember that, in fact, Robert Mugabe threw his support behind Chamisa. And Chamisa said if the results don't show that he has won, he's going to contest the results. Would you say that, in fact, the election went smoothly?
Yes, the elections went smoothly. There was no violence. There was no harassment of any other political party supporters. What we are waiting to see so far is whether the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission is going to announce those results. Because you remember what happened in 2008. A candidate, the opposition party, announced these results and they were arrested. So we are waiting to see the reaction of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission so far. But otherwise, elections have been fair so far. That's what I can say.
And the turnout, the figure we're seeing is about 75%. I think that's very good turnout. Can you tell us a bit more about the people's reaction, the mood on the street, now that the elections are over?
Yes, the turnout was huge. We spoke to some people in the streets of Harare, especially young people. They came out in huge numbers, and the ones we spoke to these are first-time voters. They were excited about voting, and they feel that this time the elections were different, because usually this time before elections, ZANU-PF in past elections would have formed bases. Bases are where they gather at night. It's called Pungwe locally, where they will be singing and also taking opposition supporters to these bases where they torture, they beat them. But this time it was nothing like that, and people were free to express themselves, and people were happy.
All right, seems very positive there. Thank you for that. Pindai Dube, your news is sister channel correspondent from Africa News. Thank you. Well, there was footage released that has gone viral. It is footage of a man violently slapping a woman on a Parisian street. And this has raised conversation and talk about how women are treated in public. Alex.
It has, Tessa, and indeed in one of Europe's foremost capitals. This video, it's worth saying, it does contain a scene that it contains a violent scene. Some of you might want to look away. But this is the video that has gone viral. Let's just take a look at it now. We can show you this video. It's been viewed more than 1.5 million times on Facebook. Marie Laguerre, you can see her there walking in a red dress. Well, she's been catcalled by a man who's also made dirty noises at her. She tells him to shut up. He then throws an ashtray at her, confronts her before going after her in the video. So after he's thrown the ashtray, he goes after her. You can see here, goes up next to her, and then he hits her violently in the face, pushing her against the side. Now, people in the cafe jump up, surprised at what they were seeing there. But Marie Laguerre shared that video. She got the video from the cafe owners and she shared it. She also put a complaint in with the police. She's saying here that she was being harassed in the street. She told the person to go away. She was violently assaulted. It's kicked off a huge discussion about street harassment in Europe in 2018. This from the French Equality Minister, saying it is not acceptable that in 2018 a woman on the streets of Paris should be violently assaulted when confronting someone who is harassing her. Now, this minister has been responsible for pushing forward new laws in France, which would see a fine of up to 750 euros for people who are harassing people in the streets like this. Those laws due to come in the autumn. So France is very much having a discussion about this. And we've seen a hashtag come out of this, and it's a hashtag balance ton porc, which in English roughly translates to, if you like, to call out the pig that is harassing you. Some people saying it's like the French Me Too, and people are using it to share experiences, similar experiences, that they have had when they have been harassed in the streets of Paris, including this employee of the British Embassy saying it was just last month that she was harassed in the street. Also saying a very good friend of hers, who's a journalist, was literally punched when she stood up to her harasser. Now, that mirrors what we saw in that video, with a woman verbally says go away and then is struck around the face. People seeing this as really a trend that France and indeed Europe has to deal with. Other people, though, seeing France as having gone forward. The fact there is Balance ton port saying that actually, France, you've come a long way in addressing this discussion. So with new laws coming in, is France an example, or does France and indeed the whole of Europe have a lot still to deal with this problem? You can let us know your thoughts using #TheCube.
All right, thank you for that, Alex and the Cube team. Now, President Trump's ex-campaign chief, Paul Manafort, he goes on trial today over counts of bank and tax fraud. The former political consultant allegedly lived a life of luxury that didn't match his tax returns, prosecutors are expected to say. Now, the allegations came about after an inquiry by FBI chiefs into Russian vote meddling in the 2016 U.S. election. He has pleaded not guilty. Well, with more information on the allegations facing Manafort is NBC's Pete Williams in Washington.
The charges do not involve Paul Manafort's time with Donald Trump. They stem from his work for another president of the Russian-backed government in Ukraine. And a key witness will be a man who knows nearly all Manafort's secrets, his former partner. For nearly a decade, prosecutors say Paul Manafort made $60 million representing Russia's neighboring country of Ukraine and its president, Viktor Yanukovych, a Putin ally. But Robert Mueller's prosecutors say Manafort hid at least $30 million of that income to avoid paying taxes, stashing it in banks in the UK, Cyprus, and the island nation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. He's accused of spending that money to buy clothes costing nearly $1.5 million, almost $2 million in antiques and other luxury goods, and to buy and remodel houses in New York, Florida, and Virginia. Prosecutors say he also lied about his income and made other false claims to get nearly $25 million in bank loans on those homes. The charges do not involve the roughly 3 months he spent as Donald Trump's campaign manager. A key prosecution witness will be Richard Gates, Manafort's former business partner, a man Mueller's team says was heavily involved in hiding the money. He pleaded guilty to reduced charges in February. For the past month, Manafort's been in jail, accused of trying to influence other possible witnesses. His lawyer has said little about the charges since the day when Manafort was arrested last fall. He did try unsuccessfully to get the case thrown out, claiming that the prosecution was beyond the reach of Robert Mueller's authority as special counsel. Manafort is 69. If convicted, he could get up to 10 years in prison, and Mueller could seek to compel him to answer questions about Russia's election meddling. And no matter what happens here, Manafort faces another trial on similar charges in federal court in Washington. That begins in September. Back to you.
That was NBC's Pete Williams reporting there from Washington. And still to come for you on Good Morning Europe, the Pope has accepted the resignation of Philip Wilson as Archbishop of Adelaide after he was convicted of concealing child abuse. We'll assess how serious a crisis this is for the Vatican. And over in the queue.
Outrage online after a polar bear is shot dead by authorities after attacking a tourist guard. We'll have the story after a short break.
Top story in Good Morning Europe. 1 week after the deadliest wildfires in recent history, Greeks gathered outside Parliament for a vigil to commemorate more than 90 victims. Now, the Vatican has accepted the resignation of its most senior Catholic official after he was found guilty of covering up child sex abuse in the Roman Catholic Church. The Australian Archbishop Philip Wilson was found guilty of failing to alert police to abuse by since-deceased priest James Fletcher during the 1970s. His resignation is the second in 2 days as a wave of new allegations of sex abuse hit the Catholic Church. On Monday, the former Archbishop of Washington, D.C., Theodore McCarrick, was suspended and ordered to live in seclusion. Well, with me and live now is Deborah Castellano-Lubov. Thank you very much for joining us. She's a Vatican and Rome correspondent. What is at stake here for the Roman Catholic Church?
Well, it's a very clear demonstration that at this time, the Catholic Church is showing that zero tolerance must be the case, that it is unacceptable for anyone, not just priests, to have any sort of sexual abuse of minors, but anyone at any level. We saw in these days a cardinal, the first time throughout the U.S. Church that anyone has ever given up their red hat. So Pope Francis is calling everyone to stop this epidemic and to respond with confidence.
And so Deborah, are there more cases now likely to follow? Are we seeing a shift?
I think at this point, everyone is taking responsibility for anything that has gone on. We've seen that Pope Francis had instituted the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors, and that the Center for Child Protection in Rome is actively working to figure out what exactly has been going on. But this represented a breakthrough, but we will expect to see more. We saw with Chile, all of the officials resigned because on some level there was an element of cover-up. So Pope Francis has even the matter.
Deborah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're having a bit of audio issues there. Thank you very much, though. Deborah Castellano-Lubo, Vatican and Rome correspondent for Zenit there. Thank you. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump has welcomed one of his main European allies to the White House, Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte. Now, this was the latest guest in both leaders. They have ideological similarities. Now, Katie Dartford has the story.
Even before Monday's meeting, it was clear that US President Donald Trump and fellow populist Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte had much in common. With their like-minded views on trade and immigration, following a meeting at the White House, they had even more to bond them, with Conte turning out to be Trump's main ally in Europe.
Today, Prime Minister Conte and I are pleased to announce a new strategic dialogue between Italy and the United States that will enhance cooperation on a range of issues.
Italy is becoming a reference country in Europe and a privileged partner of the United States when it comes to facing challenges such as terrorism and all the crises that concern the Mediterranean area, in particular Libya.
Per tutte le crisi che riguardano l'intera area del Mediterraneo.
The two men also share the same scepticism over free trade, although Conte's distrust of multinational agreements risks Trump's goal of eliminating all EU customs tariffs.
A few days ago, I met with President Juncker of the European Commission. We had a great meeting. Following that meeting, we announced a breakthrough agreement to remove trade barriers and increase United States exports.
It's a deal that I think is crucial to put into effect as soon as possible, joining efforts together in order to grant Italian, European and American citizens those benefits resulting from more equal trade relations that are based on mutual reciprocity. US sanctions on Iran, which hurt Italian-Iranian commercial relations, were also discussed, with Trump saying he'd be willing to meet with Iran's leaders to discuss a new deal related to the country's nuclear program.
That was Katie Dartford reporting there. And still to come for you on Good Morning Europe, the polar bear shot dead after injuring a cruise ship worker in the Arctic has sparked outrage around the world. We'll have that after the break. You're watching Good Morning Europe. Welcome back to the program. Now, a German cruise company has been widely criticized for shooting a polar bear that attacked a guard accompanying a group of tourists. Now, this has caused some discussion. Alex has this for us. Alex.
A lot of people talking, Tessa. It sounds idyllic, doesn't it? A trip to the Arctic to see the polar bears. Well, this is a post from Norwegian authorities after a polar bear was shot dead for approaching and then going to attack workers who were there as part of a tourist group. The authorities there saying the polar bear had to be shot dead. There was no other alternative. Now, you might question, how did this come to happen? Let's just show you where this took place. This is Svalbard. It's an incredibly popular tourist destination, part of Norway, separate from the mainland, but between Norway and the North Pole, in the Arctic Circle. Here, the population of polar bears is said to outnumber the human population. So people come here, really popular with tourists, to see the polar bears. So cruise companies boat the tourists in, and that's where this took place. These workers were going aboard Phipps Island, that's an island there, when the polar bear was said to approach them on the beach. The cruise company then saying they had no choice. They tried to scare away the polar bear. It went to attack one of their workers and had to be shot dead. This defence of using deadly force. Well, needless to say, that set off a huge conversation online. People are still writing about this today. This took place on the weekend. And people questioning that logic of we had to shoot the polar bear. Let's just pull up this quote here from this user here on Facebook saying, was deadly force really necessary? Could you not have had a tranquilizer gun or something else? After all, you're going into their habitat. A lot of people picking up on this comment online as well. other people, including Ricky Gervais, basically saying, well, actually, the whole situation, what do you mean you had no choice? The whole situation could have been avoided. If humans stay out of the habitats of polar bears, then you won't find humans injured or polar bears shot dead. But other people, perhaps coming down on the side of the cruise company, saying, well, look, it's not great. This user here saying, I'm not being thick, and, you know, perhaps suggesting I'm no expert on this, but if it comes down between the life of an animal or the life of a human, what are you to do? The guard was taken to hospital for non-life-threatening injuries and is recovering. But now, obviously, that polar bear is dead, and it's set off a huge conversation about this kind of tourism in a region that, as we pointed out, for so long has been perhaps off the tourist map, but now is becoming hugely popular. And that image of the polar bear being shared around the world after it was shot dead. What do you think? Did they have no choice? Was this the only option? Or are we intruding in places we shouldn't be, and that's having a devastating consequence for the wildlife there? You can let us know your thoughts using #TheCute.
Really interesting discussion there. Thanks for that, Alex. And thank you for joining us on Good Morning Europe. And do stay with Euronews for all of your top stories. We'll leave you with today's no comment from South Carolina, where police pursued a 22-year-old woman in a dramatic car chase through the fields and streets of Florence County. The woman, she did sustain some injuries, but she has since appeared in court.
I gotta tear down.